Another week and another pile of headlines, but in the background, an ongoing divide and debate about the conservative movement, its voices, its truth, and its direction.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
And joining me to talk about that divide and debate, but also some news of the day, is one of my favorite commentators, in particular because of his dedication to speaking in facts and in owning them. Ben Shapiro, Daily Wire co-founder, host of the popular Ben Shapiro Show, best-selling author to his latest book, which you should absolutely check out, Lions and Scavengers, The True Story of America and Her Critics. Also, very recently, a guest on Gavin Newsom's podcast. Ben, welcome. How was the governor of California? Did you come together and solve all the world's problems?
We did, and that's why California is now thriving and no one's leaving, and it's all great. He just listened to all my advice, and all of California's problems have been fixed.
You know, we need more of these podcasts and save the world. So thanks again for coming on. And I do want to run some headlines past you in a little bit, but I could not pass up this moment to talk with you about some bigger topics. You gave an extremely powerful speech at Turning Point Action about 6 weeks ago. And here's why I thought it was so important. When I go out and speak to audiences, they often want to talk about threats to the conservative movement from leftist ideology. And by the way, I agree those threats are real and very constant and very pressing. But there's another threat out there, too, to the conservative movement from within, I think from those who treat in conspiracy theories and falsehoods, often as a means of sowing hate and poison. And you laid that out very clearly, the moral failing of ignoring that threat, as well as the obligations that those who are in the influence world have to speaking openly about the truth and the facts and calling out the nonsense. I want to just start, where do you think we are in that battle? It's obviously only been a couple of months since there was this blow up over Tucker Carlson's interview with Hitler fanboy Nick Fuentes and the backlash against heritage. But as you look out there broadly, do you think there is any progress in convincing sometimes the millions of listeners who tune into these promulgators of poison that they're being sold an ugly bill of goods?
You know, it's hard to tell from the numbers. I will say that I think that the amount of support that I got for that speech was surprising to me. I figured that I was going to say some stuff that was fairly unpopular. Some of the names that I mentioned there are obviously people with very large and substantial and loyal audiences. But I thought that it was more important to say what was true. And I think a lot of people actually resonated to that, because there comes a point when the conspiracy theorizing is so broad and the accusations that are being thrown around are so absurd that you can either treat with reality or you can run away from it. And I was hoping that speech would sort of be a clarifying moment for people. If you've now found yourself in league with folks who are claiming that Erica Kirk and Turning Point USA were in league with the murderer of Charlie, if you've now found yourself massaging those people and pretending that they have something valuable to offer, then probably you've done something wrong. Something has gone wrong ideologically. And I think that there are a lot of people who are waking up to that. Is that going to go away? I doubt it. I mean, I think there's a very strong conspiratorial tint to both sides of the political aisle right now, driven by lack of trust in institutions. But it's not going to be restored overnight, the kind of rational center that people ought to follow. But I'm hoping that was a contributing kind of initiating moment.
I think it was, and that's why I wanted to call it out again, because it was actually really refreshing to see you up on that stage and actually talking about people by name. And that's what I loved about the speech, is you were like, hey, we have to be able to speak about facts, and we also have to be able to call people out. And then you did so. And not everyone is willing to do that these days. And that was part of the point of your speech, is you can't just sit quiet.
Yeah, I think that was a major thing that I wanted to do, because I think that it's easy to sort of traffic in vagaries, and then everybody can sort of escape the implication. And so here I was saying, well, I don't want people to be able to just escape by saying, well, that's not me. He's not talking about me. No, I was talking about a few very specific people. I mean, the people I name checked in the speech were Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Steve Bannon, Candace Owens. And the reason I did that is because I want people to be able to, when they're listening to their shows, and I'm not saying you can't or you shouldn't. I mean, I think you shouldn't, but you certainly can. If you're going to listen to their show, at the very least, you you should know that the critique that I've laid out is applying to those specific people, and they should rebut that critique if they take the critique seriously.
When we talk about those listeners, I mean, you're a little bit younger than me, but you also spend a lot of time with a younger conservative community out there. Do you think that is an age-related thing? Do you think that younger Americans are more susceptible to this, or is this something that's generally widespread across all age groups and audiences?
I think it's fairly widespread, but I do think that it's growing among younger people. I will say that if you look at the statistics on our outlet, Daily Wire, we have the lowest average age of any news outlet in the country. It's like an average age of 42. Tucker Carlson Network apparently is 57. There are a lot of sort of legacy, followers of Tucker from his Fox News days.
My age is by the way, it's like 96.
I will say that I think that among younger people who have found that they are out of touch with institutions, the institutions have quote unquote failed them, or they feel that they haven't had sort of inspirational figures to look up to, or who are told that the best way for them to fight for their futures is to rail against the system and to follow conspiratorial voices who are going to offer them the red pill that's going to solve all of their problems. I mean, that's a sexy pitch when you're 17, 20, 25 years old. And then comes a time where it used to be that you became an adult, where you'd get married and have kids, and you'd actually have to treat with reality. And now I guess that our country has decided, in all of its glorious wisdom, that we are going to delay the onset of adulthood permanently. And you will remain 17 until you are 90.
Well, let me ask you on that. I actually feel really bad sometimes talking to my own kids. I've got two that are in college, one's in high school, and they've grown up in this environment completely bombarded by news. Well, what they call news. It isn't really often news. You have the social media, everyone's an influencer, anyone can spout a view. And sorting through that, I think must just be mind-boggling. And it's one thing for you and me to talk about the truth. But, these kids, how do they know what's real? Especially because we also have had all these legacy media outlets that have thrown their credibility down the toilet with objectively false reporting. I mean, I spent years unraveling their Russia collusion hoax. So, I mean, when you talk to younger audiences, I mean, what criteria do you use when you're deciding who's a legit source of news? What advice would you give them? I mean, is the advice like you should just grow up and get married and have kids and then you'll be an adult? Or is there something more practical they can do when they're looking and they're like trying to decide, am I going to listen to Ben Shapiro? I'm going to listen to Candace Owens?
So I think that there are a couple of indicators. So one is that you can see the actual evidence that's being cited. So one of the things that I pointed out in that TPUSA speech is people are throwing out theories without any sort of supporting evidence. They're just assuming that the narrative fills in for the supporting evidence. And then if you don't agree with the narrative, then they cast you as part of the narrative. And so to take the Epstein example, because it's in the news, the narrative on Epstein is that there was a conspiratorial coterie of pedophiles who were trafficking in children and simultaneously deciding all of America's cultural, financial, and political decisions, and that may have been done at the behest of a foreign intelligence operation. Right? That is the sort of narrative that's being propagated online in large measure. If you say, listen, Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile, his conviction and that of Ghislaine Maxwell were for sex trafficking minors to Jeffrey Epstein. There may have been other people who are involved, but we don't know who they are, and there's no evidence to prosecute them. The evidence that we've seen so far suggests that there are a bunch of rich and famous people who hung out with Jeffrey Epstein because he was rich and he was famous, and he hung out with other rich and famous people. He may have trafficked in people who are above the age of majority in sexual ways. That seems to be fairly well supported, but that's what the evidence shows. It doesn't show anything beyond that. Then people say, well, you're part of the narrative, you're part of the cover-up, right? Because you're part of the conspiratorial elite. That's why you have an interest in covering this thing up. What I would say to people is if they can't show you the evidence for the proposition that they are fomenting, then you should not listen to them. Another great indicator, if they make predictions that routinely are not true, then you should probably consider as to whether they are in fact telling you the truth. So if you're Tucker Carlson and you say about a single airstrike on an Iranian nuclear facility, that this is going to lead to World War III and that it's going to kill hundreds of thousands of people, which is what Tucker suggested, and he's just dead wrong on that. Or if you suggest that the arrest of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela is done at the behest of Globo Homo, and it seems that President Trump, unless you're going to call him part of Globo Homo, that's a big stretch. If people are saying things that don't come true over and over and over, you wouldn't do this in any other aspect of your life, so don't do it in politics. If you went to a doctor and every diagnosis he gave was wrong, you would stop going to that doctor. If you went to a trusted friend, and that friend kept telling you crazy rumors about all of your other friends, and none of which turned out to be true, you would probably stop being friends with that person. And so you might find all of this entertaining, but there's a difference between what's entertaining and what's true. And so long as you can distinguish in your own head, then, everybody has their sort of trash TV that they watch. But treating, the news reporting of the Wall Street Journal as though it's on par with the reporting of reporting in scare quotes of a Candace Owens would be an act of foolishness.
Does part of this have to do with giving our kids as well, all Americans, better tools that we equip them with to make these sort of distinctions and rational decisions? Just a question sort of related to this, a bigger cultural question, not on any one cultural topic, but more broadly. For decades, for way too long, the right has largely surrendered the intellectual battleground of the left when it came to so many of the cultural institutions that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. Not our government, but our universities, our civic institutions, the arts, whether that be movies or music or comedy. We were even doing this to an extent most recently in our economic institutions. When you look, the way that woke was taking over corporate boards and oil executives saying, well, we can't drill for our main product anymore because that might upset the Greens. It's just insane. But we seem to be clawing a little bit of that back. We've had some changes on campuses, at least lip service being paid to more viewpoint diversity. Melania, I saw this weekend, the box office taking $7 million. It's a conservative documentary. There's a lot more to do. What more do we need to be doing so that the rest of society that surrounds our young people every day is giving them some better ways of looking and making decisions about things?
I think this is totally right. The one thing that the right has spent decades doing is tearing away left-wing institutions, which of course is necessary. The problem is if you don't have replacement institutions, and what you end up with is basically chaos or apathy. And I think one way that you've seen that is the death of the experts has not led to the rise of a new class of experts. It's led the right to come to the wrong conclusion. Instead of don't trust the experts, which fair enough, they move to trust the non-experts,
right,
which is not the logical corollary, but that is where you move, right? And so it's like, okay, homeless Jim over there, we're going to ask him about his opinions on COVID because Anthony Fauci got it wrong. And well, what if we go and talk to Dr. Bhattacharya, who actually does know what he is talking about when it comes to COVID? And so offering good alternatives to these things is absolutely necessary. That's why, I think it's great that people like Joe Lonsdale and Barry Weiss have launched alternative universities, or that Barry is involved over at CBS News. I think that trying to course correct major institutions and rebuild them is big. I think we live in such an anti-institutional moment that one of the critiques that I have of the right is we're so addicted to tearing down institutions that even when the right tries to build an institution, there's now an attempt on the right to tear down the institution, because any institution is going to have doors, and those doors are sometimes going to have to be closed. And this is one of the points that I made at Heritage Foundation. The night before I spoke at TPUSA, I spoke at Heritage. And one of the things that I said at Heritage is Heritage was supposed to have standards.
Right.
Things have definitions, and words have definitions, and terms have definitions. And by nature, those definitions are exclusive to other definitions. If you say something is conservative, it ought not be liberal. If you say that you are for a peace through strength foreign policy, then you are not for an isolationist foreign policy, right? One thing is not, A is not B. And so, noting that requires us to make those distinctions. But the right is so addicted to the idea that institutions must be torn down that the minute you say that I want to reestablish some form of ideological border control, as I called it, you want to do, now you're a censor. Now you're just like the left because you're being censorious. It's like, no, the problem was not having standards. The problem is that the standards that existed before were wrong.
Right.
But you do need a set of standards. Otherwise, you're just wandering around in nihilistic fashion across a wasteland of politics.
Yeah, you just need the correct standards, better standards, ones that we define that we agree with, but you can still have standards. Speaking of standards, and this is a slight shift here, the hate mongering, the conspiracy theory wing of the conservative movement is obviously extremely concerning. But also concerning to me as a free market person is the growth of a wing in the party that's now becoming a big government right. Now, having big policy divides in the GOP isn't new. By the way, like one thing that I actually love about the right is that we tend to have healthy and open debates about things, unlike the left where they get their marching orders from the top and then they shut down any dissenters. But that being said, the wisdom and the success of free market policies has been, to me, so clear for so long, defined back to Reagan. I've been spending a lot of time wondering where this new impulse kind of comes from. And when I hear conservatives and some elected Republicans now talking about getting rid of right to work states, to make nice to union bosses, or demonizing entrepreneurs and markets, or calling for more regulations on drugs or other sort of price controls, I sometimes find it hard to believe that this comes from some well thought out belief that these policies will actually work. I think at best it might come from not thinking, but I think at worst it maybe come from some misguided belief that this is good politics, to demonize and to sort of lazily believe that it's okay to grow government as long as you're growing it for your own aims. I mean, where do you think this impulse is coming from in the party?
So I think on the one hand, it's coming from a sort of attempt at political pragmatism. We were told that the Trump era was sort of the ushering in of almost a right-wing European style on the right, this sort of big government conservatism that was concerned with family formation and family preservation. But the only way to do that is by restructuring all of society's systems. We don't work for the free market. The markets work for us. Therefore, we should be able to control those markets in ways that are most beneficial to the people that we like or the systems that we like. And so I think that they think that is a politically winning hand. I think it also does come from a conspiratorial belief that free markets have somehow robbed people of their birthright.
Right.
And therefore free markets have to be laid low, that free markets are actually a tool of the elite. You see this sort of language used when people conflate various definitions of globalism. So they will suggest that, for example, the UN, which is a globalist institution in the sense that it wants one set of rules supposedly for the entire globe that will now overcome the interests of Americans. They use that in the same sense they mean, free trade, which is not the same thing. And those are, that sort of conflation allows for the idea that there is a conspiratorial elite that is benefiting from free trade, or that is benefiting from capitalism and from private property ownership and low regulation. And those people are actually rigging the system for their own benefit, which is left-wing language, but it is very fertile ground for our populist moment. Again, when you see distrust, not only in the institutions, but in all the big systems, you start to mirror a lot of the principles of the left. I mean, it's some of the economics talk by, say, Steve Bannon is indistinguishable from the economics talk by Elizabeth Warren. And I don't think that that's a coincidence, because both are basically saying that the free market is a rigged system that was set up on behalf of an elite to benefit people who are, quote unquote, not like you. And now they have to be laid low. And the only people who can lay them low, well, that person is me if you give me enough power. And that is incredibly dangerous stuff. I'm seeing it growing by leaps and bounds on the right. I think that, for those of us who love free markets and love capitalism and understand the utilitarian good of capitalism, but also the morality of capitalism, in the aftermath of the Cold War, the beauty of the Cold War, and there was not much to celebrate, but one of the things that there was the idea that there was a counter that you could look to and say, okay, it's not that thing, right? We may disagree internally about the top marginal tax rate, but we know what the opposite looks like. We know what not capitalism looks like, and it looks like this horrible slave state that keeps people in a state of penury and points nuclear weapons at everybody doesn't like. And that's bad. And after the Cold War, I think we stopped on the right explaining what capitalism was. You could have a Milton Friedman free to choose program on national television in the 80s. But after the Soviet Union falls, people stopped feeling the necessity to explain the morality and decency of capitalism. And then that lets in through the back door all this sort of Marxist talk about wealth inequality and how the markets are rigged to the benefit of the few. And my favorite is when people suggest that capitalism has been rigged for the benefit of particular corporations, and that's why capitalism has to end. It's like, that's not capitalism, right? you create a category error, and then you use that category error to push yourself into further crony capitalism, as they call, again, a terrible term. It's just corporatism, into further corporatism or economic fascism.
Yeah, it's a great point. By the way, I put huge blame for that sort of failure to stand up for the benefits of capitalism on our CEOs and members of our economic community that just completely abdicated their responsibility on this over recent years and cannot seem to find the courage to get it back. But isn't part of the problem here, and you can tell me if you agree or not, is that some of this intellectual confusion comes from, it's not that the free market isn't working for enough people when you look out there. I think the problem is that we don't have a free enough market. right. And the left has already so successfully inserted government into so many basic areas and necessities, whether it's housing or electricity prices or healthcare. I mean, it drives me nuts. Yes, we have a freer healthcare market than a socialized country like England, but it is hardly a free healthcare market. I mean, it's Obamacare. I mean, it's the kind of worst of the worst in some ways. So, I mean, doesn't that sort of add to the ability of those who want to put forward this false narrative? Because we're not even talking about the same terms here. We don't necessarily have the free markets we need.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, one of the charts that I love showing on the show is the chart that shows which products in American life have become cheaper and more plentiful and which ones become more expensive. And there's only one rule, which is if the government has intervened and subsidized, it has become massively more expensive over the course of time, whether you're talking about housing, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about medical care. And then if you look at things like food prices, those have dropped precipitously over time because those are actually free market driven. But one of the beauties of being on the left or on the populist right is that you can blame the free market for problems that you caused. So we obviously saw this, I think, most clearly with the Great Recession, where it was government-involved housing policy that clearly and obviously led to the collapse of the housing market and then to all of its spillover effects through the rest of the economy. And then Barack Obama would get up and say, capitalism has failed. The only way to save capitalism is to kill it. We need to move toward a significantly more intrusive government regime. And this is always, again, I come back to the conspiratorial point because I do think that is a form of conspiracy theory. There are people who are rigging the system. The only way to overcome the rigging is for us to rig the system ourselves. If we fail, it's because we didn't rig it hard enough. So we need more power to rig it even further. And that is incredibly dangerous because, and you see why it's politically sexy, because for an individual, if things aren't going right for you, you have a choice. And it's the same choice that Cain was given by God. Like you can go to Abel and figure out what he did right to have a sacrifice accepted, or you can just kill Abel. And I think that the political pitch is always, well, I'll help you kill Abel and you'll feel better about yourself. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. The system has failed you. I will fix it if you give me that sort of power. And again, I think you're seeing that on the right. The people have asked before, I would never run for office because it seems awful.
Oh, yeah.
And I have young kids. I would never, ever do it. But if I were to run ever, what I would run on the basis of is I can't get rid of your problems. All I can do is get things out of your way so you can solve your own problem.
Correct.
And that's all government really can do is just get things out of your way so you can solve your own problems. But no politician's ever going to get elected to national office on that basis, probably.
Oh, I don't know. Ben Shapiro for president. I'll get on board. I always said I'll never work for a campaign, but I could support that. My own view, by the way, just on this last thing on this topic, but when you look at the kind of populist right, those making those claims, my view is that a lot of them have got out more on their skis than Donald Trump ever was. Look, he came to office in 2016, and there were a couple of discrete areas where he definitely wanted to rip down the kind of establishment viewpoint on things, in particular on trade and on immigration. It almost feels to me as though there's a younger generation in the party that's like, well, it worked on those two issues. We'll just double, triple down in sort of all different areas. I'm not quite sure he's always been on board with it, but does it concern you all to now hear him? He seems to have been persuaded in some ways, calling to regulate drug prices, impose caps on credit card fees, the vice president trashing on businesses. How alarming is that to you?
I mean, it's very alarming. And again, I think that the thing to understand that everyone who watches him closely knows about President Trump is he's totally non-ideological. He will kind of stick his finger into the pie, and then if it's good, then he will taste it. And if it's bad, then he won't. And so he'll experiment with sort of big government interventionism in particular areas until it doesn't work, at which point he will stop it. But I think that people read that as he wants to gobble up every pie he sees. And they're looking for, the kind of cracks that he created in sort of the old conservative edifice, not as flaws that or chips away at it, but as him attempting to full scale explode it. And so now they're going to come and they're going to absolutely just devastate the entire field of play. And exactly. And I think that the thing about Trump that's actually kind of shocking is when it comes to the economy, for example, how not a wrecking ball he is. Meaning there are certain things that he took a wrecking ball to, trade policy, but there are certain things that he absolutely did not. Deregulation is a traditional conservative point.
Fantastic.
Lower taxes, traditional conservative point. Moving authority to the states and away from the federal regulatory structure. Conservative idea. Like these are not complete breaks with sort of conservatism of the past, but you're seeing people formulate entire philosophies of what quote unquote Trumpism is. And this is a point I make on my show a lot. There is no Trumpism. There is just Trump, right? There's just Trump and what he's doing, right? There's no philosophy of Trump. And so when you see J.D. Vance try to weave that into a philosophy of sort of post-liberalism and with critiques of the Declaration and critiques of individualism and the necessity for you to be buried in the town where your grandparents grew up and all that sort of stuff. Like, Donald Trump didn't say any of that. Maybe that's your philosophy. That's fine. We can argue about it. But pretending that is Trumpism, that's no more Trumpism than sort of my free trading is Trumpism. Right? I have my own peculiar perspective on where I think America ought to go economically, but I'm not going to attribute that to President Trump just out of political convenience.
Great point. And this is why, actually, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this, because I do think we're headed for this moment at the end of Donald Trump's second term. There is going to be a vacuum, and there's going to be a lot of people rushing to fill it with all kinds of curious and interesting ideas, which are not necessarily linked to Trump. I just want to finish off here. I want to talk about one last aspect of the party in the future. And that's foreign policy. And again, when Donald Trump came into office this last time in 2025, I was a little worried. It seemed that there was a more isolationist wing of the party that was very much on the rise within his administration. And you saw a kind of pure standoff this summer with folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene lecturing the president that engaging in things outside the country was not MAGA. And he pushed back pretty hard. He's like, I kind of came up with that term, and I think I will continue to tell you what it actually means. And it's notable to me, he has spent more time on foreign policy in his first year of the second term than any year of his first term. He was arguably far more engaged, obviously, than Joe Biden was, even present. But given that skepticism among many in the base, what role do you think Donald Trump's, I think, very muscular and engaged foreign policy is playing in that debate within the party? Is this having the effect of reminding the base of the benefits of strong deterrence, or, the old saying, peace through strength?
I mean, I think that it is. And I think that, I had President Trump on my podcast a couple of weeks before the election. And I asked him about isolationism versus peace through strength. And he said, I'm not an isolationist. I'm a peace through strength president. And he was in his first term. And I think that he is in his second term. I think, frankly, he enjoys foreign policy because it is an area where the presidency has plenary power. I mean, yes. The president has outsized power when it comes to foreign policy that he does not have when it comes to domestic policy. And no matter how many executive orders the president signs about credit card rates, a lot of this stuff is going to get knocked down in courts and never actually happen. Whereas when it comes to foreign policy, he can actually effectuate major change by simply saying yes to things, whether that is the capture of Nicolas Maduro or whether that is the bombing of the Iranian nuclear reactor. And so I think that he enjoys that a lot, sort of on a personal level, but also on a presidential level as someone who wants to effectuate change. Again, I think there are a lot of people who looked at his rhetoric, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, some people who are in the administration, who saw his anti-Iraq war rhetoric and generated an entire philosophy of almost left-wing isolationism, a sort of Buchananite isolationism from 1997. And then said, that's Donald Trump. And they just ignored everything that he actually did during his first term. And so some of us were not particularly surprised, actually, when it turned out that he was much more interventionist than they thought he would be. Honestly, I thought that the big surprise is that he was staffing up his administration in the way that he was. I was more surprised by the fact that there were people who were going into state and defense who seemed to be more aligned with the isolationist wing of the Republican Party, the sort of paleo-con American conservative wing of the Republican Party, than what Trump himself was set to effectuate. And I think that's still the debate inside the administration. I think there is a reason why Secretary of State Rubio has seemed to have had outsized influence. I'm not sure that it's because Rubio's had outsized influence as much as it is because Rubio actually mirrors what the president thinks about foreign policy better than, for example, the vice president seems to.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that at times Donald Trump may have wondered about the wisdom of some of the people that were brought into his cabinet, not just in foreign policy realm, but across the range. Last question, and we'll finally get to the news of the day. Last question. What do you think about the fact that we're now seemingly going to try to talk to the Iranians? I mean, the last the Iranian people heard from Donald Trump was help is on the way. And to use the president's own words, we've now put an armada off of Iran. And yet word is that our negotiators are going to meet Iranian emissaries in Turkey later this week. I don't think that this bodes very well.
I don't either. It's very difficult to tell what direction President Trump is going to take. Remember, there were talks that we were going to talk to the Iranians before he struck their nuclear facility back in June of last year, too. And that was literally that weekend. Steve Witkoff was supposed to be in Oman, I believe, negotiating with the Iranians, and then the United States bombed Fordo. So, I think that there is, every possibility that it's a head fake. There's every possibility that it's real. I would say that I think that the president is very much aware of the perception in the public mind and internationally that he told the Iranian people to go out in the streets and keep protesting and help would be on the way. And that if this ends with the Iranians supposedly shipping fissile material to the Russians while maintaining their ballistic missile development as well as their terror apparatus, then he will be seen as weak on the world stage. And if that is his solution, by the way, he should be seen as weak on the world stage because that's bad policy. Right. And I don't think the president is likely to do that specifically for that reason. I also think that he's holding off because he wants to make sure that whatever military option is used is actually effective. I think that what stopped him from doing these sort of Obama, Syria, you cross the red line, let me shoot one missile, pinprick strike. I don't think President Trump likes that sort of stuff very much either. I think that if he wants to do something, he wants it to be effective. And, you know, it's hard to tell from the outside who is in his ear. I mean, you have people who are obviously highly engaged in the Middle East for a variety of reasons, both good and bad, who are in his ear. Here I would be referring to Witkoff. And then you also have people who are sort of more thoroughly consistent in their foreign policy approach. That'd probably be the Secretary of State, maybe Secretary of Defense, a couple other people in the administration. So the president has had, to this point, I think, almost perfect instincts when it comes to Middle Eastern policy. So I'm hoping that the president keeps that up.
Well, one thing that is absolutely certain is that if you are an Iranian government thug, you are a lot more nervous every night in bed than you ever have been. And that has all been very much for the good, a return of American deterrence. Ben Shapiro, I love listening to you, and I always learn so much doing so. So I thank you so much for coming on today. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in. We're here every week. If you like the show, please do hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to write to us, you can at atkim@wsj.com.